Kodak Video Programs proudly announces a brand new video series of animal programs for children of all ages. Titled Animals in Action, this 12-volume video series combines fun and fact as you meet animals of all sizes and all shapes up close. See how animals live and adapt to their world. Laugh at rare moments of animals at play. Learn all about the differences of animals, how they move, talk, see at night, build their homes. With beautiful photography by award-winning Survival Anglia Limited, Animals in Action is a series you'll want to collect and enjoy over and over again.
Hello, I'm Thane Maynard, and welcome to Animals in Action. 400 years ago, people used to walk around in outfits like this one. It was a pretty good way to protect yourself back then. But today, we'll be looking at animals that wear armored plate. And with the help of Keith Shackleton at the drawing board,
hello,
we'll get some idea of the surprising number and variety of these specialized animals. Everybody's familiar with this type. It's a terrapin pushing its head out of its turtleneck. And this huge sea turtle, it's a loggerhead cruising off an ocean beach. And a giant land tortoise from the Galapagos Islands. But not many will recognize this customer. It's an insect, a caddisfly larva. It's building a protective tube out of tiny pebbles, which it cements together to form a tiny mobile home. This will protect it from predators lurking on the river bottom. The ocean-living cockle has its own shell that it secretes as it grows. It's made mainly of calcium that the cockle extracts from salt water. It's one of the toughest armor plates in the whole natural world. Crabs are another example. Even their legs are armor plated. The garden snail is really just a slug with a shell on its back. Like the cockle, the snail makes its own shell, and as the snail grows, so does its shell. The armadillo has a really tough skin that doesn't really protect it from predators, but allows it to run through tough, prickly undergrowth where no predator could follow. Even its head and tail are covered by these tough scales. They're actually modified hairs. The pangolin looks a little like an armadillo, and in fact, they are distantly related. It's sometimes called a scaly anteater. And though it has a real reptile look about it, it's a mammal like the armadillo. The pangolin's scales are also simply very specialized hairs. Crocodiles have true scales that cover their entire body. This is an Indian mugger crocodile about 9 feet long. Those large scales on the back have a bone inside them. crocodiles are actually close relatives of the turtles we looked at a moment ago. Sometimes people ask me, what would a turtle look like out of its shell? Ever had that question, Keith?
I have. It's what would you look like without your skin?
Exactly. Some people have the idea that turtles are like snails or even hermit crabs, that it's a boneless creature living inside a hard shell. But turtles are reptiles. They have backbones and rib cages and all the other bits of skeleton that go with being a reptile. Their shell is actually an adaptation of their skin, hardened like a crocodile's scales, and fused to their bones. Here's an example, a Hermann's tortoise from southern Europe. And here's a Greek tortoise. Turtle design is obviously highly efficient. It hasn't changed in 300 million years. Both species look alike, but a good way to tell them apart is to look at the tail. The Hermann's tortoise on the right has a small hard scale on the very tip, and the Greek doesn't. Now, most people think of a tortoise as a slow-moving, ponderous creature, but that's not always the case. This is a gopher tortoise from Florida, and by turtle standards, it's really tearing along. It would never have caught up with a proverbial hare, but it could keep pace with a person out for a stroll. This is a baby leopard tortoise from East Africa, enjoying a meal of flowers. Tortoises are particularly fond of flowers, especially yellow ones. As well as leaves and fruit, some will eat meat in the form of dead animals or even a large, juicy earthworm. This one's no bigger than a tennis ball at the moment, but in 10 or 12 years' time, it'll be as big as a crash helmet and ready to find a mate. These are radiated tortoises from Madagascar. They're now very rare in the wild. Their courtship consists of the larger male pushing the female from behind. The clunking of their shells can be heard for hundreds of yards in the surrounding forests, and they'll go on like this all through the day and well into the evening. There's another question I get asked a lot, and I'll bet you do too, Keith. What's the difference between a turtle, a tortoise, and a terrapin?
Yeah, I do, and it's very hard to answer.
We probably should try to give our audience an explanation. Maybe a drawing or two would help.
I think the foot. Let's start with a foot anyway and see where we go from there. It's the best clue, I think. Here's a very simple foot, very easy foot to draw. Square-ended, stubby, got 5 toes here. And it's got 5 very stubby little claws on the end. Looks like an elephant's foot, actually, but it's certainly the foot of a land animal, and that's a tortoise. Now, this foot is a much more elegant one, rather more fun to draw. Still got the 5 toes here, but they're spread out, much better defined toes. And they've got sometimes a bit of a web between them. There's another clue, because that is a water animal. But here's the difference. On the end of every one, a nice long claw. The claw of a carnivorous animal that has to tear up meat. And that is a terrapin.
Okay, a tortoise is a land animal, and a terrapin is a water animal, a freshwater animal, and that leaves the turtle. And I guess we can say that the marine versions, like loggerheads or leatherbacks, can be called turtles.
Absolutely.
So a tortoise is a land animal, a terrapin is a freshwater animal, and a turtle is a saltwater animal. And if you can't remember all that, don't worry. Call them all turtles and you'll be quite correct. These are giant tortoises, and we're in the Galapagos Islands. They're the world's biggest tortoises, reaching 4 or 5 feet in length and weighing up to 600 pounds. Their legs are thick and strong like an elephant's, and when they move, they lift that enormous shell and body right off the ground. But even a tortoise this size hatches from an egg no bigger than a hen's egg, although it could take 40 or 50 years to reach this size. We're back in Africa now with the baby leopard tortoise. Now, given the chance, all tortoises enjoy a drink, whether from a pond or a rain puddle. But they try to avoid getting wet, especially in a tropical rainstorm. And here's a terrapin. They live around ponds and rivers and spend most of their time in the water. Unlike the tortoises, they're mainly carnivorous, feeding on snails, insects, and frogs. They're pretty good swimmers, too. We've moved across the world to Asia now. This is a leaf terrapin, so named because when it's young, it looks like a leaf. It's about the size of a saucer. Although it lives mainly in water, it still has to come to the surface to breathe. It's feeding on winged termites that happen to have fallen into the river, and that little fish had better watch out too. The North American mud terrapin is among the world's smallest. Fully grown, it could easily sit in the palm of your hand. It spends almost its entire life in the water, hunting among vegetation. Those 2 little pieces of skin under the chin are very sensitive and can detect moving prey amongst the muddy bottom. Terrapins are found wherever there's fresh water throughout the warmer parts of the world, even in remote desert oases. This is an African mud terrapin. It's a little larger than its American cousin, perhaps a foot or so long. These desert pools have a habit of drying up occasionally, and when they do, the terrapin simply burrows down into the mud and sits it out until the next rains. They spend a lot of time basking in the sun, either on the bank or anywhere else they find suitable. The hippo doesn't seem to mind his passenger, but it's a good thing the terrapin has got that armor plating. Some terrapins hardly go near the water. This is the familiar box turtle found all over the United States. Although it's officially a terrapin, it behaves far more like a tortoise and only enters the water occasionally. Its shell is perfectly designed to give it maximum protection. The legs, head, and tail can all be drawn inside. The under part of the shell is hinged and can be closed like a drawbridge. Although it looks a little like a meat pie, its shell makes it almost impossible to eat. It's perfect armor against animals such as raccoons, badgers, rats, etc. that would normally eat it. Once the danger is past, the box turtle can slowly open up and emerge. Across the other side of the world, in Asia, a totally unrelated group of terrapins have developed exactly the same principle for defense. And not surprisingly, they're called the Asiatic box terrapins. The Asian box terrapin grows a little larger than the American one, perhaps to about 10 inches long, and it does spend a lot of time in and around the water, especially around mangrove swamps. Here they feed on crabs, fish, shrimp, and any other small animals they come across. While most terrapins have bony shells that completely cover their bodies, there are a few that have very little armor. Their mobile home consists of just a thick, leathery shell, and not surprisingly, they're called soft shells. You can see from their webbed feet that they spend most of their time underwater and rely on their speed, powerful claws, and razor-sharp jaws for defense. The mata-mata from South America relies on camouflage, not just to escape from predators, but mainly to fool its favorite food, fish. The fish thinks the terrapin is just another algae-covered rock and swims around it. When it comes within range of its head, the mata-mata strikes and the fish is gone. It takes a breath of air through its snorkel-like nose and moves off to fool some more fish. Well, we've certainly seen some pretty bizarre characters among the terrapin group, and the tortoise group as well. So now it's time to take a look at the turtles. Maestro, a picture, please.
A picture, Thane, right. Well, remember the stumpy old tortoise foot, the land foot, the flatter terrapin foot with the meat-tearing claws. Now we're going into a group of animals with a completely different forelimb, a forelimb of graceful curves, long and pointed. No claws like this, just a tiny bit of a claw that comes somewhere there. It's a paddle, a swim fin, a sea-going animal, and that is a turtle.
And here it is in person. This is a loggerhead turtle cruising along off a sandy beach in the Pacific Ocean. These are the giants of the turtle family, and they're among the largest reptiles on Earth. Each year, the female turtles haul themselves up onto beaches like this to lay their eggs. It's always the very beach where they themselves were hatched. They usually emerge at dusk or under the cover of darkness to travel the furthest they'll ever venture from the water. She'll lay about 100 ping-pong ball-sized eggs in a hole in the sand, and then laboriously fill it in. This is a leatherback turtle. What looks like a tear is in fact a stream of mucus to keep the eye free of sand. The leatherback lacks a hard body shell. Instead, it's covered by a thick, leathery skin. It's the equivalent among the turtles of the soft shell among the terrapins. Even though they have a relatively soft shell, only the largest of sharks could tackle one of these. This female is almost 9 feet long and probably weighs over 1,400 pounds. When she hatched on this beach over 20 years ago, she was only 2.5 inches long. Two months later, and 2 feet below the surface, the loggerhead eggs are about to hatch. The young start to burrow their way to the surface. They're about the size of a matchbox and have to make the 30-yard dash to the sea as quickly as they can. If they manage to avoid the crabs and birds patrolling the beach and the sharks and other fish in the sea, they'll reach full size in 5 or 6 years, but only 1 out of 100 will make it. The leatherback turtles have also started to hatch and are now making their way to the sea, probably attracted by the moon reflecting on the waves. Their front flippers are each as long as their body. They're powerful swimmers. In fact, the fastest of all turtles. The baby leatherback will have to increase its weight over 10,000 times before it's fully grown. These green turtles are hatching on a beach in Bermuda. What happens to them during their first few months of life remains a mystery. They probably float around on sargassum weed, feeding on the small creatures that live among it. They'll grow quickly on this animal diet, and when they reach about a foot long, they'll turn vegetarian. This little one has been fitted with a float and radio transmitter, so the scientists can track its movements for a few days. The whole apparatus is then designed to fall off. Turtles have their share of natural enemies to keep their population in check. But over and above the natural enemies, they also have to contend with people, too. Here in South America, tortoises are hunted for food, as this pile of shells behind the local market testifies. The tortoises are called redfoots, and their tasty flesh has made them very rare. For hundreds of years, certain species of turtles and their eggs have been recognized as an important food source. But clearly it will help no one if these species are hunted into extinction. A combination of scientific research and careful conservation measures can do a great deal to help ensure that the red-footed tortoises, as well as their many cousins in the turtle family, will continue to live and thrive around the world. You know, turtles have been around for 300 million years, and that's a very long time. They saw the dinosaurs come, and they saw them go. And that shell of theirs must be one of the main reasons for their success.
It was certainly a lot more successful than old Sir Lancelot here.
I hope you'll join us again next time for another look at Animals in Action.